Have you ever heard of an artist, like a name that keeps popping up, in these like hushed, reverent tones, and you just get this feeling that there's this whole world to discover?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I get that with Bob Camblin.
Interesting.
Yeah, he's been called like this mystical trickster figure,
Right.
an enigmatic artist whose works are super sought after.
Right.
But the sheer volume of what he created, over his lifetime remains like largely unknown.
Well, that's kind of intriguing, especially because we actually have access to a pretty interesting collection of material.
We do, yeah.
Both like Camblin's own thoughts as well as details about his life and then kind of, you know, different ways of looking at his art.
Hmm.
We're drawing on things like his personal reflections,
Right.
his own statements about his art,
Yeah.
even how critics and fellow artists kind of experienced his work.
Yeah, we have a really rich mix of perspectives here.
Yeah, it's a really rich mix of perspectives.
And for you listening, think of this deep dive as kind of your express route through it all. Nice.
We've gone through this material to extract like the core ideas
Mm-hmm.
that shaped Camblin's unique way of seeing and creating, and also how that like developed over his career.
Yeah, yeah.
We'll be highlighting, recurring images and concepts in his art and writing, giving you a real handle on this like complex and very compelling artist.
That's cool. It's worth pointing out, too, as we kind of go into this, just how diverse his artistic output was.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
I mean, we're talking oils, acrylics, watercolors, drawings, prints, even painted paper.
it's crazy. Yeah.
And then adding to the intrigue, his pieces don't come up for sale often.
Right.
And when they do, they tend to disappear, quickly.
Oh, they're snapped up.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess maybe let's start by unpacking like what you would call his fundamental artistic philosophy.
Okay.
And one thing that really struck me is his conviction that art operates on a level beyond conventional critique.
Okay, so outside of criticism, yeah, like he famously said, art speaks directly to the viewer's soul, evoking emotions and sparking contemplation without the need for interpretation or explanation.
Interesting.
So it kind of makes you think, what did he think art was?
Yeah, that's a great question. What did he think art was if it wasn't something to be interpreted?
Right.
Well, the sources do mention a facsimile of his manuscripts, which suggests he placed a real value on that, kind of like direct and almost unfiltered connection with the artist's intention.
Oh, interesting.
So, I mean, it's almost as if he wanted the art to like bypass the intellectual filters and just resonate emotionally with the viewer.
Yeah, just go right to the soul.
Right to the soul, right to the heart.
Yeah.
Why do you think he felt that was so important?
That's an interesting question. I feel like maybe he was trying to cut through the noise of like analysis and criticism and like speak to something more primal.
Maybe.
And this kind of connects with this concept he has called everyday enlightenment through art. And so one of the book reviews talks about finding beauty in the unexpected, in the absurd, accepting that nothing lasts forever.
Okay.
Apparently that book, Zen and the Art of Enlightenment, aimed to cultivate that very outlook.
Interesting.
It wasn't just about looking at a pretty picture, was it?
Right. So, like, if we connect this to like a broader kind of understanding, it seems Camblin saw art not as a definitive statement or like the answer to anything,
Right.
but more as questions disguised as images, right?
Oh, wow.
The review highlights how his work encourages like philosophical contemplation rather than providing like easy solutions.
Right.
It kind of makes you think about the role of art,
Yeah, for sure.
Is it to instruct or is it to provoke thought?
Right, exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because he really intended to spark these intensely personal, subjective experiences in whoever was looking at his work.
Wow.
One source even mentions his ambition to, like, blow our minds by taking the symbolic and decorative aspects of art and kind of eliciting them into something mystical.
That's a pretty bold aim.
It's a pretty bold aim.
It indicates a strong belief in the power of art, to transform, to go beyond just being aesthetically pleasing to something deeply personal, maybe even spiritual for the viewer.
Absolutely. So let's delve into like some of the key themes and recurring ideas that, we find woven throughout both his writings and his art.
Yeah, sounds good.
And like one that kept coming up for me is this idea of fragmentation and unity.
Hmm.
We have quite a bit of detail about a painting called Find the Missing Piece.
Okay.
What stands out to you about that piece?
Well, find the missing piece definitely seems like a good place to kind of like explore this duality.
Yeah, it's like a central point.
Yeah. I mean, the descriptions talk about these like swirling crosshatches in black and gray
Mhm.
with these dark bone-like shapes kind of laid over them.
Okay.
And interestingly, one account initially describes those shapes as green,
Oh, interesting.
before later descriptions, clarify that they're dark.
Hmm. Okay.
So, I mean, there's this immediate sense of something being, like, incomplete,
Right.
yet there's also this feeling, that there's a potential for everything to, like, coalesce,
Oh, yeah,
to come together.
totally, totally.
And then the YouTube commentary, connects this directly to a Zen perspective,
Right.
which, like, suggests that achieving peace isn't just about arriving at this finished state, but that it's often found in the very act of searching, of putting the pieces together.
Right.
So the scattered elements of the piece, they kind of mirror the restless human mind striving for that wholeness.
That's so interesting. What do you make of that connection, like between this painting and a Zen perspective?
I mean, it's a very compelling interpretation.
Yeah.
The YouTube analysis even brings in hexagram 18 of the I Ching,
Okay.
which is about work on what has been spoiled.
Right.
So it's emphasizing this need to address disorder to find balance.
Oh, interesting.
It also references the Tao Te Ching and how harmony can emerge from seemingly opposite forces.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, the I Ching with its, like, ancient wisdom focused on change and interconnectedness,
Right.
it clearly resonated with Camblin's thinking.
And it's really clever, too, because there's this wordplay that is pointed out in the description.
Oh, yeah.
This pun on peace and peace.
Right.
That really underscores this feeling of something essential being absent or like scattered amongst these fragments.
It's almost like a visual and linguistic puzzle.
It really is. And, one source calls it makes you think about the conceptual puzzle aspect of it.
Right.
Like it's not just about how it looks, but it's a challenge for us to contemplate our own understanding of peace.
Yeah.
Whether on a personal level or like a broader collective one.
Right, yeah.
Building on this idea of fragmented reality, another significant theme in Camblin's work seems to be traps and illusions. The book review actually mentions the figure 4 trap, which I thought was interesting,
Yeah.
as a symbol of like being caught or entangled.
Right, yeah. So it seems like he was fascinated by, both literally and in a more metaphorical sense, these vanishing acts.
Yeah, he was really interested in those.
Yeah, and the question of what is real versus what we simply perceive is something that appears to be, like a recurring concern in his work.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, like, what kind of illusions he was interested in exploring.
Right, exactly. Well, the review talks about, different kinds of traps in his work.
Okay.
Fear traps, time traps, even ones that we create for ourselves,
Oh.
self-made.
Right.
Which is interesting. It suggests this idea of paradoxes made visible.
I like that.
Like traps that in some way they don't actually trap.
Right.
So it raises an interesting question, I think, about the nature of confinement.
Right.
Is it always external? Or can it be, internal as well?
Oh, that's so interesting. It really makes you think about those like psychological dimensions of his art, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
How we can get ensnared by like our own thoughts and beliefs.
For sure. Another theme that seems kind of closely related to that is stillness and impermanence.
Yeah, I see that.
So there's this exploration of enduring stillness.
Yeah.
Contrasted with constant movement and change.
Right.
It seems Camblin viewed accepting impermanence not as a negative thing,
Yeah.
but as something that could actually be liberating.
Yeah. And one of the reviews in our sources captures this really beautifully.
Okay.
It quotes the book as saying, "The art invites you to embrace impermanence as a liberating force, a reminder that all things change, including our own minds."
Nice.
It suggests nothing's truly fixed, reflecting not only like the shifting perspectives in art history, but also our own internal evolution.
It really makes you think about the role of the viewer, engaging with Camblin's art.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's clear he demands a very active and contemplative approach, almost like a spiritual practice or this ekphrastic dialogue that one review mentions.
Right, an ekphrastic dialogue.
Which refers to a really vivid kind of description of a work of art.
Right, yeah. So his works aren't just passive objects to be looked at.
No.
They actively provoke questions and introspection in the person viewing them rather than offering like these neat, straightforward answers.
Right. And it sounds like this was very much his intention.
Yeah, absolutely.
The book review even brings up the idea of data problems and traps within his drawings.
Okay.
Like these aren't just decorative elements.
Right.
They're there to encourage a deeper level of exploration and engagement from the viewer.
Yeah. So shifting our focus a little bit, let's discuss like creativity and Camblin's own artistic process.
Okay, yeah.
And we have this really interesting quote from him where he talks about feeling seduced by history, critics, and a very affluent but weird culture, and that one must go back to the unknown and naive approach to art.
Huh. So what do you think prompted that shift in his thinking?
You know, I was thinking about that, and I almost feel like it suggests a real yearning to, like, break free from these external pressures and expectations that can often surround the art world,
Yeah.
to get back to a more authentic and maybe even like a more intuitive way of creating.
Right.
Yeah.
And that aligns with the idea mentioned in one of our sources that he saw the artist as the only free agent in society.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. So, I mean, it makes you wonder, what did that naive approach look like in his later work?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
There's also this idea of a move towards participatory art,
Okay.
like a stepping away from this traditional notion of art as this precious, untouchable commodity.
Right.
It seems like he wanted the viewer to be more involved, more active in the experience.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to connect this back to find the missing piece.
Oh, how so?
Well, the YouTube analysis kind of suggests that the fragmentation in that painting could represent the raw, like unformed materials of inspiration in the creative process itself.
Oh, interesting.
These disparate ideas that eventually find their own unique alignment.
So the process of creation mirroring the fragmentation of the piece.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, we can't really talk about Camblin without considering the influence of, Zen and Eastern philosophies.
Of course, yeah.
Our sources mention, his engagement with Zen principles like simplicity and just seeing
Right.
the I Ching.
Yeah.
That ancient Chinese text focused on change and balance, a theme that clearly resonated with Camblin.
Yeah.
And even the concise and profound observations, found in haiku.
Yeah, he was clearly a very engaged reader.
Yeah, he was. The biography even mentions his deep interest in the writings of Emerson.
Oh, cool.
The wisdom of the I Ching and the art of haiku and haiga,
Right.
that beautiful Japanese form of combining painting and haiku.
So cool.
What's particularly insightful is this concept he has of zazen, the aimless mind, focuses itself in relation to drawing and inspiration, which suggests that by letting go of, like, forced intention and allowing the mind to be still, that's when true creativity emerges.
That's so interesting. And one of his quotes in our collection kind of touches on a really profound distinction. He says, "Believing and knowing are different. Most people practice a belief or a religion. They were raised in mystics, know something else. They remain connected to a faith or abandon it, but they have been somewhere and logic won't make the trip. One must look for the balance of intuition and logic."
Wow.
What does that suggest to you about his worldview?
Well, it suggests a belief in forms of understanding that go beyond purely rational thought,
Right.
a recognition of intuition and direct experience as valid paths to knowledge.
Yeah, I love that. Now, maybe let's turn our attention to Camblin's life journey and like how he developed as an artist.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So we know he was born in Oklahoma in 1928,
Mm-hmm.
and he received, this really strong foundation in art, including that prestigious Fulbright scholarship to Italy.
Right, so the biography details his time at the Kansas City Art Institute and that pivotal Fulbright experience in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
It also highlights his teaching career at various universities before he made a really significant decision later in life.
Right, yeah. He taught at a number of institutions, including Rice University in Houston,
Oh, interesting.
which seems to have been a really important period for him. And it's interesting to note his collaborative spirit during that time.
Okay, yeah.
He teamed up with artists like Earl Staley and Joe Tate, creating these collaborative events and exhibitions under names like B&E Productions and The Holding Firm.
So interesting. What do you think drove these collaborations?
I mean, it seems like it was really pushing against these traditional ideas of like the solitary artist
Right.
and like individual authorship, placing more emphasis on like the shared creative process itself.
Yeah, very much so. And then in 1976, he made this really impactful choice to become a nomadic artist,
Oh,
funding his travels entirely through the sale of his art.
that's a pretty radical move, especially for that time.
It is. It is. He traveled quite extensively, drawing inspiration from all the diverse cultures and landscapes he encountered.
Yeah.
And around that same period, his art also evolved from abstract expressionism towards this style he termed mouches volontés,
Okay.
which involved creating optical illusions using like dots and
That's
dashes.
so interesting.
So you have to wonder what sparked that stylistic shift.
Yeah.
Well, the biography does mention his ongoing fascination with metamorphosis
Okay.
and also the recurring imagery in his work. Things like scarecrows, puppets, and glass reliquaries.
Okay.
And the scarecrows, we learned, may have been inspired by Gunter Grass's dog ears
Hmm.
and this Germanic concept of spring renewal.
So interesting.
It's really interesting how these literary and cultural references kind of weave their way into his visual language.
It really is, yeah. And it appears he had a rather, like, complex relationship with what he called the art game.
Okay.
He was hesitant to, like, paint for money. And he held some very specific ideas about how exhibitions should be presented.
Right.
Like, there's this great quote where he's instructing a gallerist to create this immersive experience for each artist, avoiding comparisons and minimizing any external interference.
Interesting. So what does that tell you about, like, what his priorities were?
It really underscores his desire for the viewer to engage with the artwork, like, directly,
Yeah.
on its own terms, without the distractions of context or comparison to other artists.
Yeah, I see that.
We also learn about his concept of turning stumbling blocks into stepping stones, which he visually represented in his paintings of jars of water,
Interesting.
which I thought was like such a powerful metaphor for resilience and the ability to find opportunity, even in like really difficult situations.
Yeah, absolutely.
And later in life, he relocated to the Oregon coast
Okay.
and then to Louisiana, and it seems that he unfortunately lost touch with many of his friends from his time in Houston.
Oh, wow. So sad.
It is sad. There's this like really memorable anecdote about him often wearing a Mr. Peanut costume
Really?
and even signing his artwork as anonymous, which I think really speaks to this desire to diminish his individual ego in the act of creation.
That's interesting. It reinforces this underlying theme of, moving beyond the personal and striving for something more universal in his artistic expression.
Yeah, totally, totally.
So as we kind of bring this deep dive to a close,
Right,
I think it's important to consider how his work was received
right, yeah,
and what legacy he kind of leaves behind.
yeah, for sure.
Our sources mention critical recognition,
Okay.
with Charlotte Moser noting the shifts in his artistic styles, and Eleanor Freed highlighting, his deep engagement with, like, the cycles of life and death and renewal.
Right, yeah.
And the biography emphasizes that, this collection of information, it really aims to introduce his work to a broader audience.
Yeah.
With the hope that, what it calls discerning art enthusiasts will recognize his unique talent and originality.
I love that. And one of the quotes we have from Pete Gershon, I think sums it up really well.
Right.
He calls him one of Boomtown Houston's most committed, talented, and enigmatic artists, a mystical trickster figure ripe for rediscovery.
Interesting. It seems he left behind this really powerful reputation
He did.
as a true creative force, an artist who, as another quote says, questioned everything, leaving a legacy that continues to spark curiosity.
Yeah, and his former student, Earl Staley, even shared that. Like, Camblin taught him fundamental lessons in drawing and composition, principles he still applies, every day in his own studio.
Wow.
That's amazing. That kind of lasting impact speaks volumes about, like, his influence.
Yeah, absolutely. So for you, the listener, I think, bringing it all together, Camblin's art really seems like this incredible exploration of paradox.
Yes.
It's an invitation to look within, to embrace the ever-changing nature of things, and to truly question how we perceive reality.
Yeah.
He challenges us to find that elusive missing piece, not necessarily in like a final answer,
Right.
but in the continuous process of seeking and questioning itself,
So true.
which raises a really interesting point for you to think about,
Yeah. Okay.
Considering Camblin's multifaceted approach
Yeah.
and his deep emphasis on, personal discovery,
Right.
what missing piece might you be searching for in your own life?
Oh, wow. That's good.
And how might embracing the uncertainty in the journey itself, rather than just focusing on, that destination,
Yeah.
lead you to a more profound understanding?
Right. It's definitely something to ponder. We encourage you to maybe even revisit some of these quotes and descriptions we've shared today.
Yeah, because with a deeper understanding of Camblin's world, you might discover new connections and meanings that you hadn't noticed before.
Absolutely.
This deep dive into his art and ideas is really just the starting point of what could be a truly fascinating personal journey for you.
It really is.